Welcome to our meditation retreat. It's wonderful to see that so many of you made it here despite the events of the last few days. If there's been any doubt in anybody's mind about the urgency of change in human consciousness, it's become very, very obvious now how urgent that inner transformation has become. If we are not to be condemned to repeat the past over and over, to repeat the past, history, the collective human past, a lot of which is a succession of events, dreadful violence that we witnessed recently, and also the past within, the conditioning of the human mind, the structures, the old patterns, that to some extent are still there in everyone, in some humans in a much more acute form. So we are here to go beyond that conditioning, deep-seated, and to go beyond that requires alertness, attention, presence. So I'd like to open the retreat by ringing this bell, and the sound of that bell is a call to attention. And that is our continuous task for the next few days. To be in the state of alert attention that does not deny anything that's happening, allows it to be in a state of openness. So our task in the next few days is to allow this moment to be. Any emotions that are part of this moment, also allow them to be. And that allowing creates a space around it. If it's an emotion, through allowing it, and emotions will come up, especially at this time. And not to deny, we are not here to deny any of that, but to allow it so completely that through the act of allowing, a spaciousness arises around what is. That is the essence of spiritual realization. That's also the origin from where comes all healing, renewal, and not so much to be aware of that spaciousness around events, anything that arises at this moment, realizing that that is the essence of who you are. You are not that which arises. You are the field in which it arises. That is the deepest core. So I'm starting the meditation retreat already by giving you the essence of it. So you could even go home after this. If you knew that deeply with every cell of the body and immediately see it deeply, then that's it. And then you would realize also the truth that is so beautifully expressed in this big book, Course in Miracles. It's at the very beginning, there's a summary. It says, these lines summarize the whole course. And they say, nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. To allow this moment to be requires you to be in that state of alert attention. Otherwise, that which arises at this moment as a thought, an emotion, or an external event will draw you in completely. Your sense of self will be drawn into that. This is to be identified with thinking. The continuous stream of thought means your thought stream draws in your attention so completely that you're totally trapped in the conditioned structures of thought. And that state of inattention is the state out of which what we call evil, which is deep unconsciousness, arises. So the root of that deep unconsciousness that manifests as evil in the world is the state of being asleep, spiritually speaking, completely trapped in conditioned mind patterns. So our task here is to be aware of that in ourselves. That which arises, whatever arises at this moment, within or without, to be able to watch that, be with it, be open to it. And then there's always something greater than that which happens, whether that which happens is a happy or an unhappy event. They come and go in any case. If you want to cling to a happy event, or a happy thought, or a happy emotion, then of course, after a little while, that comes to an end. Or if you feel threatened by an unhappy event or an unhappy emotion, then you get drawn into reactivity, and the world becomes a fearful place, because there are so many things that are to be feared inside yourself and outside. Many thousands of people died a violent death not far from here last week. The mind seeks an explanation. I don't want to give you any facile explanations. First of all, to see that that's what happened. Of course, every physical form comes to an end. But it always seems very sad if it comes to a very premature and violent end in that way. And we become aware of how fragile the fabric of phenomenal existence is, how quickly what seems so solid and real can dissolve. And what looks so tragic from a normal perspective, and it is, if you have read accounts of people who faced the imminent possibility of death and survived, or people who underwent a so-called near-death experience, there's one common factor that most of them speak about. They speak about the fear that is there up to almost the very end. And then the last few seconds, an accident seems inevitable. Somehow they survived, so later they could talk about it. An accident seemed inevitable, And the last few seconds, many of those survivors speak of suddenly great serenity and peace came. And you have a similar account in near-death experiences where it seems that people already went into death. And many of them described those last few moments as a sense of deep peace and a sense of all is well. It seems contradictory when the survival of their physical form was threatened. But at the last moment, a shift happened. And suddenly there was a deep sense of rightness even there, which from an external perspective seems impossible. And that is that peace that comes, and I'm sure it came to many of those who died in the last few seconds. It came to me. I died psychologically, and the whole psychological structure of the self died through intense suffering. And again, there was the same experience of deep peace suddenly when it all collapsed. There is another side to it, even to what looks like an unmitigated tragedy and disaster. It's on the surface, this is not the case when you look at it from the surface. There is the redemptive factor at work, and that is the realization that you are not this form identity as which you appear temporarily in this world. And when your form identity, your existence as this form, physical form, is threatened, truly threatened, then there's the possibility of spiritual awakening. And the strange thing is, in some cases, the spiritual awakening, or what I call the flowering of consciousness, can come to a person in the last 5 seconds of his or her life. And it doesn't matter, the flowering is there. And according to the ancient Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is read by the monk to the dying person, even after the physical body has died, there's a thread that runs through the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and that is at various stages, even after that, the possibility for you to recognize your essential nature comes several times. You miss it, and then another possibility comes. If you miss them all, then okay, then, as they say, I'm not wanting you to believe anything, but the book then says, then okay, you reincarnate again. If you miss that, then you will be forced into the cycle of reincarnation. But please, I don't want to give you any new belief structures. And I don't want to give you I don't want this to be a comforting belief, because we want to go deeper than that. So when your survival is threatened as a form identity, there is always the possibility of awakening out of identification with this form, and that your survival as a form identity can appear in two ways. One is your physical existence is threatened by something, imminent death of the physical. It can also be that the survival of your psychological form identity as the mind-made sense of me, the self, with my story, my history, and my unhappiness, and happiness occasionally, that is threatened or imminent, has reached a point of imminent collapse, sometimes because the suffering is so acute that it cannot sustain itself anymore. And there also is the possibility of sudden disidentification from form, which is mind structures and emotional structures. Before, consciousness was totally identified with those structures, and suddenly it removes itself, so to speak. And this is when you speak of it later, people use different words and some cannot express it at all because it defies language. What is it that happens at that point of realization? And some people to whom it happened all they can say, this was the case with me when I died psychologically, all I could say was, there's so much peace suddenly, both within, and it even seems as if the peace were outside, even in the traffic. It seems to be even in there. I couldn't understand it. So many say such serenity, such peacefulness, and yet aliveness, and perhaps cannot explain any further where does that come from? What is that? In the very face of death and disaster, how could that suddenly appear? And then, fortunately, there's a further possibility for that awakening. Otherwise, you would have to wait for disaster to happen, or your physical death. The other possibility arises through spiritual teaching, not teaching in the form of learning new things, but the power of a teaching that arises out of that state of realization. And all then a few pointers are given, but there's a power behind those pointers. And so one could say, you are here also to die to your form identity, to your complete identification with me as this physical, psychological form, which is a very fearful state, because everybody knows, no matter how much you deny it, that it's only a matter of time before that goes. Whether it goes when you reach the age of 95 or 100, whether it goes in a violent explosion created by a madman, or whether it goes when you least expect it and you slip on a banana skin and break your neck and it's gone. Death comes in many disguises, but it's always the same. So we honor for a moment those thousands of people that died, and we are not denying that on one level, yes, it is deeply sad and tragic. And we also see that there is a deeper level to it. And not as a belief that tries to reinterpret it and just to make it okay so that we don't suffer so much. No. Just to see the impermanence of all forms, life forms, to see how fragile this fabric of phenomenal existence is, of forms, to recognize that recognition is the beginning of something else. It's strange. It seems, what does it mean when you see, isn't it sad that every form of life is so short-lived? Shouldn't we be weeping every day because each one of us is condemned to death? If you could have a little date on you. Each one would have a date if you knew it, and you could read it on your hand or something. You see, oh, that's how much time I've got left. And that is the truth. And it is a miracle that humans are not continuously wailing and weeping, because they are condemned to death, all of us. And why are they not continuously weeping and wailing? Because underneath it there is a recognition that is not the ultimate truth. Otherwise nobody could even live any longer. Why do anything? Why carry on with anything? It's all going to dissolve anyway. Of course it is. And even your children, why? I mean, they are going to die too. It's all dissolving like dust. If it doesn't dissolve violently, it dissolves through the passage of time, which goes fairly quickly too. So if you saw this room and a speeded up version on a film, which condenses 2,000 years into 1 minute, and 2,000 years is very little on a planetary or cosmic level, then even the seemingly solid objects, you would see them crumbling to dust. They're already crumbling to dust, it's just you can't see it. And that would be an amazing eye-opener if you could see all of phenomenal existence within 1 minute, gone. Now, let's see, if the whole world were one color, let's say, if everything were green, every object, every being green, the color green would not exist for you, of course, because you would have nothing to differentiate it from. Now, the whole world, everything that appears in this world is impermanent, is dissolving already, every form, including this form. If there were nothing else, remember the analogy I just gave you with green, if there were nothing else, you wouldn't even know it. If there were only green, there would be no green. If there were only impermanence, there wouldn't even be the knowledge of impermanence. The very fact that you can know it and see it and be aware of it, not as a thought, but just as an awareness, an aware presence. And there's simply the looking, there's simply the seeing of it. So if you see how a form dissolves, slowly or violently, and simply your eyes remain open, so to speak, I'm using seeing both literally and metaphorically, and you're simply in that state of open, almost astonishment, and you see the forms, the flux, the continuous coming and going, birth and death of all these life forms. And you see it. The seeing of it is the beginning of the awakening, is already the awakening. It seems insignificant to see it, because after you've seen it, the mind will come in and say something about it. That's not it. The mind might draw some conclusion and say, okay, so that means I'm not going to do anything anymore because it's pointless anyway. So what's the point of it all? I mean, I just might as well go home and get drunk. Or that's the mental conclusion. It leads you astray again. So if we can remain with the seeing, the pure seeing of it, and not come to any mental conclusions about it, and stay with the seeing of the coming and going of forms, not only as death, also of all forms that come into your life and then leave you again, come and leave you. Wow. And there you are, present. There's a presence, suddenly, that seeing, that awareness is we need to be very careful here. At this point, it would be best for me to walk out of the room, stop speaking.